So, good afternoon, everybody. Um, I would like to recapitulate what we have discussed till now. Till now, seen that as a country, the growth in the iron making capacity or iron and steel capacity is foreseen. At least till 2030, the country has planned for 300 million tons per annum in production from a current level of roughly 180 million tons till 2030. We are poised to go up to 300 million tons. Also, we have seen that CO2 emission that is happening is much higher than the world benchmark. The emission from the classic route, that is BF-BOF, is around 2.7 tons per ton of crude steel, in comparison to the world benchmark of 1.8 tons per ton of crude steel. So there is a big gap. So as the first step, we think that we can bring it down, the emission from 2.7 to roughly 1.65 million tons, 1.65 tons per ton of crude steel, and which gives us, keeping the same emission, it gives us a margin to increase the production. And beyond that, we'll have to find new means to bring down the CO2. So from there, we've seen in the classic route, blast furnace is the biggest consumer of carbon, and we use a lot of carbon, or rather, the biggest user for the carbon is blast furnace. We've also seen that the carbon has got two uses in the blast furnace. One is the heat generation, and the second one is the reduction. Reduction is happening in terms of CO2. From CO2, it reduces the oxides. Oxide, when I say oxides, it means that the iron ore or plus the sinter plus pellet, this is what is the burden, and these are iron bearing burdens. So we may sometimes call it metallics, and which is essentially Fe2O3. In case of sinter, there is some amount of FeO as well. In case of pellet, the FeO is very small, that is about 1%, but iron ore has got only Fe2O3. Now, we also talked in the last class that there are two functions which are happening. One is the reduction process, and another one is the heat generation. So it is essential to generate the heat because the reduction is happening at certain temperature. And so we need to provide the heat. And for heat, here in case of blast furnace, we are going to see in detail how the heat is generated and where the heat is generated and where the reduction is taking place. So if we would like to share my laptop with you so that you can see. So as you can see, in the heat generation is happening predominantly below the cohesive zone. And once we say cohesive zone, that is this zone where you can see the cursor. This is the Bosch zone. Now, the Bosch zone, the last line or the bottom line is the melting line, and the line above that in the dark, this thing, that is the softening line. So once we are talking about the cohesive zone, this is the cohesive zone which is marked in the dark. So heat generation that is happening, mostly it is happening in this Bosch zone. And as you can see, uh, here the input that is happening, which is causing the heat generation, is the blast, enriched blast, is entering through the two-air. This is the two-air that is being shown, if you can see the cursor. So the two-air, from the two-air, we are injecting the blast, and the blast is heated prior to this. So this blast contains enriched, otherwise also if we don't enrich, it contains 21% of oxygen, and it also contains some amount of humidity. So humidity, even if we do not add steam to the blast, the atmospheric humidity will be present there. So it has got H2O, it has got nitrogen, and it has got oxygen. So blast has got these components. Now, apart from this, so blast, once it gets inside, there is huge amount of carbon which it sees, and that carbon is coming from what? It is coming from the burden. Here, if you see from the cohesive zone, the coke, which is this zone, the coke is slipping, and there is a rain of coke which is happening from the top. Then, if we have coal injection, then the coal also from the injection is available here. There is a dead man, which you can see here. The dead man is a, let's say, large heap of carbonaceous material, or the coke itself. So the coke, since it is in the majority and oxygen is not in the majority, therefore the gas that is formed here is carbon monoxide. And since carbon is present there, and if there is humidity, then it leads to CO plus H2. The H2O is broken. Now, if we look at the positive contribution of the heat, positive contribution of the heat is happening by burning the carbon into, or oxidation of carbon into, carbon monoxide. So every mole of carbon, or every kg of carbon that is oxidized into carbon monoxide, it generates 2450 kilocalorie. Okay, so this is the predominant heat input equation. Apart from that, there is only one other source through which we are generating heat, and that is the sensible heat by the blast. So hot blast is carrying heat. So if I am sending the hot blast at 1000 degrees, versus when we send the hot blast at 1200 degrees Celsius, clearly the hot blast of 1200 degrees Celsius is carrying more heat. And therefore, as we discussed last time, that if heat is the constraint, then we can substitute, or let's say we can generate more heat by increasing the blast temperature. And whatever is the measure through which we can increase the blast temperature, that would contribute to reduction of the carbon. Okay, because that much of heat we don't need to generate through burning of the carbon, because there are only two major sources that we talked about, which are generating the heat. Now there are two things which are absorbing the heat in this very zone. As you might have guessed, that the humidity, or the H2O, once it comes in contact with the carbon, then it is an endothermic reaction through which we generate CO and plus H2. So this is endotherm, and therefore in this very zone, in the burst zone itself, it takes away some amount of heat to for this equation. There is another, let's say, utilization of the heat which is happening in the burst zone. That is, since we are having coal injection, so the coal injection, the coal has got certain volatile material. Now, why it is essential to what is happening if we substitute some amount of coke through the coal? Then coal, if we look at, it has got three components. It has got ash, it has got carbon, and it has got volatile material. Now, if we analyze the volatile material, now first of all, to free the volatile material from the carbon and the ash, we need certain amount of heat, because this release of the volatile material is happening at a temperature higher than 550 degrees. So as the pulverized coal particles, they enter into the blast furnace through the tour, then it attains, within a few milliseconds, it attains that temperature through which the volatile material is separated. And once the this separation of the volatile material is also absorbing heat. So whatever heat that we generated, heat generation was through what? Heat generation was through the oxidation of the carbon into carbon monoxide, and the sensible heat brought in through the hot blast. Okay, so these were the two heats through which we have pinched some heat in by, let us say, by for breaking the humidity into the CO and H2, and also for releasing the volatile material. Volatile material contains, let's say, hydrogen predominantly. Let's say volume wise, it is between 52% to 56, 57%. So that's quite substantial. And apart from that, there are hydrocarbons. So we can say in general CH4, C2H2, C2H6. So hydrocarbons are present there. Then there is, in small amount, it is containing carbon monoxide, and some very small amount carbon dioxide, and plus nitrogen. So these are the things which are contained in the volatile material of the coal, which gets released within the burst zone. So burst zone is now having more of, if we are injecting PCI, then it is having more of hydrogen, and some amount of, and plus carbon monoxide. So this carbon monoxide portion is, carbon monoxide is generated because the carbon is interacting with the oxygen of the blast. So this portion, this part of the heat generation is contributing positively to the heat, whereas the volatile material, release of the volatile material, is contributing negatively. So you must understand that in comparison to the coke itself, here we have a source which is generating heat, but some amount of heat is absorbed. Now, with respect to the coal injection, I wish to say that it is generating some amount of hydrogen, and therefore hydrogen, for reduction, it will substitute some amount of carbon itself, and therefore if we have to work on reduction of the carbon, then this is a good choice, because it is also giving heat, but is absorbing a small amount of heat from there for releasing the carbon monoxide. Now from there, now from here, as the gases means the gas which are generated in the burst. What are the gases which are generated in the burst? Below this line, they are essentially nitrogen, nitrogen which is coming from the blast. There is carbon monoxide, there is hydrogen. These are the three major gases which are emanating here, and they are carrying a lot of heat, because here we are generating the maximum amount of heat, and which is dependent upon the flame temperature and the heat generation that has taken place. So from here, the hot gases are ascending up. As the hot gases are ascending up, the burden is coming down. So if we now look at this picture, Here, what is happening? We are charging the iron ore. Once we say iron ore, that means that it is ore plus sinter plus pellet. Okay, that is forming one layer of the material. And second, along with this ore itself, we charge some amount of nut coke. If we have to consume nut coke, it is not essential that we charge nut coke, but it makes economic sense to charge the nut coke, because as we make the coke within the plant, there would be some coke which will be of a smaller size, and so if we use that within the blast furnace, then we are not wasting that much of a small size coke. So small size coke is also charged along with the ore sinter and pellet. Now, in the alternate layer, we charge the coke. So these are alternate layers. One layer is metallics, or what we call iron ore, and the second layer is coke. Then after that again ore, and then coke. So these are charged from the top. So burden, this is what is known as burden. So burden is descending down, whereas the gases that we generated in the bars, they are going up. So two things happen here. Now, if we look at the area which is above this this softening melting zone, then two things are happening. One is that since the gas which is ascending up, that is at higher temperature, so it will impart heat to the burden, and because this is a simple counter current heat exchanger. Why I said counter current? Because the burden is coming down, whereas the gas is going up. So they are in opposite directions. So therefore, this is counter current heat exchanger. So gas is imparting the heat to the burden. So the any burden which is closest to this point, just above the cohesive zone, that will have the maximum temperature. Whereas after imparting the heat, gas that is going on top, here we will have the minimum temperature. What is shown here as the blast furnace gas, this will have the minimum temperature because it has imparted, or it has transferred maximum amount of heat, and then whatever is the remnant heat, that dictates the temperature of the blast furnace gas. Now, in this exchange, let us see what is going to happen. If the productivity of the blast furnace is high, then uh, should I explain what is productivity? Productivity is production of the hot metal per ton, well, in terms of tons per day per cubic meter. So this is to let's say normalize the blast furnace volumes. So productivity, once we say productivity, then it normalizes the volume of the blast furnace. So if you have got a 2500 cubic meter blast furnace, or you have a 4500 cubic meter blast furnace, so per cubic meter, whatever is the production in one day, that is what is productive. So if we have very high, if we are aiming for high productivity, which every installation tries to achieve, then the burden will come down at a faster rate, because this burden itself, what we are charging at the top, is descending now, and then is finally melting into hot metal, and what we take out from here, hot metal and slag. So the velocity, or the time taken for the burden to come up to the bottom is less, because the productivity is higher. So the time is much less. Where also, because for achieving this high productivity, we have to generate more gas. So the gas also takes less time from the bottom, from this burst zone to the top of the blast furnace, this also is lower. The time. Now, if these two are not very conducive for both the things, not very conducive means what will happen? That heat exchange will not be as good as if you give more time, because if you give more time, then the heat exchange will take place very well. Whereas, but then it will be counterproductive, because ultimately we have to also make it economically viable. And so, for considering that, we need high productivity. So, we'll need to look at that, how we improve the heat exchange. Now, second thing which is important here, that if the time taken is low, then the reduction process also may be questionable. Gas that is going up and the burden is coming down, if both the times are less, then the reduction process also may not be complete, because for a given reducibility of the burden, it is not getting sufficient time. Now, what is the property which ensures that the reduction is complete? And that is known as reducibility property of the burden. Okay, so if we have to reduce the entire burden and then melt it, because that is what is our aim, then we need to have a very high reducibility burden. So if the burden reducibility is high, in that case, the reduction will be complete before it comes to the cohesive zone. And once it comes to the cohesive zone, then it will simply melt. But if, let's say, the reduction is not complete, then what will happen? Then the melt will consist of higher amount of FeO. FeO means it is unreduced material. And once that will happen, it will create more problem in terms of there will be loss in the temperature of the hot metal. Also, the slag will carry that FeO, and gradually you will find that the temperature is coming down. So it will be counterproductive, and therefore, in such a case, we'll have to reduce the productivity. We'll have to increase the fuel rate, and we don't solve any problem. So in such a case, the reducibility will be the constraint, certainly. And for improving the reducibility, we'll have to tamper with the burden. We'll have to improve the property of the burden.
Part where you explained that if it is not completely reduced, the burden, FeO is there. So can you explain that part again?
Yeah, I'll do that. Because if we look at, let's say here, what is happening, that we have the maximum temperature here where it is melting. Okay. Now, the reduction is happening from the top. If we look at the blast furnace, if we look at this sketch, then here in the top portion of the blast furnace, the gas is going up and is evaporating any moisture that is there. Okay, and after that, the gas is going on top. Below this portion, there is a first level of reduction. First level of converted into Fe3O4, and below that, the Fe3O4 is getting converted into FeO, and below that, FeO is getting converted into Fe. Suppose we don't, the reducibility is poor, reducibility property of this thing is poor. In that case, given the concentration of CO in the gas, what will happen? That the portion which is reaching here where it is melting, it would not have, FeO would not have got converted into Fe. And if FeO is not converted into Fe, then here, as you can see the droplets, these droplets will consist of some amount of FeO and some amount of Fe. And um, this would these FeO will come out along with the slag. So normally in the slag you will find roughly 0.3% FeO, but if such a thing is happening, you will find that FeO is around 1% or 1.5%. Now, once that's an indication that the total we are not giving sufficient time for the gases, uh, or let's say the CO concentration or the reducing gas concentration in the gas is not sufficient. Or and why it is not sufficient? Because the burden reducibility property is not good, and so it is asking for more concentration of the reducing gas, because reducing gas property of the burden is such that it is hard to reduce. If it is hard to reduce, then we'll have to increase the concentration of the reducing gases. And what are the reducing gases? That is CO plus H2. So these are the two reducing gas. So we will have to improve these two. We'll have to jack up the fuel rate. So if we jack up the fuel rate, then you will find that this FeO problem has gone. So this is, but in such a case, the objective to reduce the carbon content will have to be sacrificed. So that is not the objective. Our objective is to reduce the carbon content. And for reducing the carbon content, then we'll have to create situation where the demand for the reducing gas is low. And how can that happen? That will happen by improving the reducibility property of the burden. One of the examples is that you cut, like if you compare the reducibility property across the three types of burden, one is iron ore, another one is sinter, and the third is pellet. You will find that sized ore has got the minimum reducibility index. That means it is much harder. So if your sized ore is around 20%, you may like to reduce it to 5% or 7%. Okay, so that the reducibility property will improve. This is regardless of whatever reducibility index you have for the sinter. Now, but in the center itself, we'll have to examine how we can improve the reducibility. So if your reducibility index for the center is 65, then we'll have to aim for improving the reducibility property of the center from 65 to 70, 75, and then finally to 80. So this will give us the direction in which we have to make improvement, and then we can look for reduction in the carbon content. Okay, is that making sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now there is another factor that I wish to discuss, and that factor is that gas is the reducing gas has got two things, as we discussed till now. One is that it is giving the heat, and it is facilitating the reduction property. So once it is giving the heat, imparting the heat, why it is essential? Because all the reduction that is happening, this is happening beyond a certain temperature. So if you do not facilitate that much of temperature at certain given point of time or certain height, then the reduction may not take place. Suppose if let's say beyond the softening melting zone, if the temperature is not let us say 1100 or plus 1100, then FeO is not going to get converted into Fe. So it is extremely essential that we provide for the isotherms. I would like to show you the isotherms are like this. Just one sec. Yeah, these are the isotherms. So the isotherm at these isotherms, it is difficult to, you can either visualize it, or there are special probes through which you can measure the isotherm. But the isotherms give you an idea whether what kind of any improvement that we have thought of, whether it is happening or not happening. Okay, because this will tell you that where the isotherm of 650 is there, where the isotherm of 800 is there, where is the isotherm for 1000, and where is the isotherm for 1100, and where is the isotherm for 1200. So based on that, you can determine that reduction will happen at this height or will not happen at this height. It will happen at a lower height. So if it is happening, the reduction is happening at the lower height, in that case, you have more chances of oxides getting into the slag. So you need to improve the reduction property, as we discussed till now. So this is important that we visualize certain isotherms, and although isotherms, as you can see in the center, the temperature is higher. Because why we try to keep the temperature higher in the center? Because to ensure that there is sufficient gas penetration towards the center. If we do not do that, then that part of the center would not take part in the reduction process. So it is essential that the gases impinge and come out through the center. That ensures that we have the gas penetration, sufficient gas penetration. Okay. Now that for a good productivity, why we are looking for good productivity? It is not only for economic reason, also from let's say the reduction of the carbon consumption. Why? Because there are certain losses which are a kind of constant, like the heat losses. They would be constant. But if we are producing more from the same furnace, then losses remaining the same, if we are getting more production, then the carbon consumption, which is related with the heat loss, that consumption will remain same, whereas so per ton of the production, the carbon consumption will come down. And therefore, it is essential that improve the reducibility from that perspective. Okay. The also, and the heat transfer that we talked about, heat transfer is important because all the reduction is happening at certain fixed temperature or beyond certain temperature. Now, we have seen two things. One is that heat demand, and second is the reduction. So let's talk about the reduction. As I had mentioned earlier, that hydrogen, 1 mole of hydrogen can substitute 1 mole of carbon monoxide. And since 1 mole of hydrogen, let's say, substitutes 1 mole of carbon monoxide, therefore, if we inject, let us say, hydrogen somehow, then that will reduce the requirement of carbon. And how do we do it? Let's say it will be very difficult to inject it along with the blast, because along with the blast, if you inject hydrogen, it will immediately get converted into H2O. And that H2O, again, when it goes in near the tour, then it will consume some amount of energy to break into H2 and CO. So it is equivalent to injecting steam, which takes away the heat. So then the other part of coal injection, as we said, that if we have volatile material, sufficiently high volatile material, like say 25% or 27% volatile material, then that will have the sufficient amount of hydrogen. And that hydrogen will replace the requirement of CO. So it's a good strategy to go for higher amount of coal injection with let's say high amount of volatile material. This not only aids the consumption of the carbon, also is economic, because you will find in the market the high VM coals are cheaper than volatile material coal. So we should aim for 25 to 27% volatile material in the coal injection. That will help our objective of reducing the carbon consumption. Okay. If we do not get 25 or 27% let's say volatile material coal, then we can create a kind of a blend of the coal. Let's say if we get 15% or 18% VM coal, then we can blend it with 35 or 40% VM coal, such that we get a resultant VM of roughly 25 to 27%. So that would be economic. Also, it will have good substitution ratio. Substitution ratio means 1 ton of coal, how much is it substituting the coke? Okay, because ultimately the aim of using the PCI is to replace the coke, which is much more expensive carbon in comparison to the coal. So it will have the economic value. Also, the carbon requirement is coming down, and by use of the hydrogen, and therefore it aids in improving the carbon consumption in the process. Okay. Another factor that we have not discussed till now, that is here, if we look at in this below the melting line and above the dead man, this zone is called the Bosch zone. So in the Bosch zone, we discussed that we have only three gases, that is carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Okay. So nitrogen helps in carrying the heat. Carrying the heat means if we have lower amount of nitrogen, for example, if you have got very high amount of oxygen injection in the blast, then that will certainly produce the carbon monoxide, but the amount of gas that is coming out from the Bosch and is imparting the heat above, that amount of gas will be lower. Uh, just to give you an example, suppose if you are enriching the blast by 5% versus suppose when you are injecting, let's say, oxygen to create an enrichment of 20%. Then in case of 20% enrichment, you have how much oxygen in the blast? You have 41% oxygen. So only, let's say, the amount of nitrogen that is available there would be 100 minus 41, so which is 59%. And so the and the CO, once it gets converted into CO, because the oxygen, 1 mole of oxygen will give you 2 moles of CO. So if you have 41 cubic meter of 41 moles of oxygen, that will give rise to 82 moles of CO. Now, so let's say you are meeting the requirement of reduction, but you may not meet the requirement of heat exchange. And what is the indication of you are not meeting the requirement of heat exchange? That indication is that you will find that the top gas temperature is very low. Okay. And why we don't want the top gas temperature to be very low? Because the top gas temperature, it is carrying some amount of dust, and that dust is coke dust and ore dust, and the sinter dust, and so on and so forth. Because from the top of the blast furnace, the gases that are coming out, they are at in the stack, they are at a velocity of roughly 2 meters per second. So they do carry some amount of dust. Now that dust goes into the gas cleaning plant. And if you have, let's say, lower temperature, in that case, the H2O that is generated, that H2O may be result of two things. One is the moisture in the burden, which gets evaporated. And second is that hydrogen that we injected, hydrogen also after the reduction of the burden gets converted into H2O. So that H2O is available at the top. Now, because there is H2O, these two sources of H2O will induce some amount of humidity in the top gas. Also, we have let's say the sinter dust. Now, sinter dust will contain CaO, will contain MgO. Now these are cement. They can create a kind of binding property because you have moisture, you have CaO, you have MgO, so that will create a cake. And in the dust catcher, you will find very difficult to take out the dust from there because the moisture has facilitated the cake formation, and if it gets formed, then the dust catcher evacuation will be very, very difficult. So we do not want the condensation of the moisture, and therefore we don't want the top gas temperature to be very low. Now, then what is the gas temperature to which we can allow it to go? We need to calculate that how much H2O is carried in the top gas, and we have to find out that what is at a given top gas temperature, what is the relative humidity. If the relative humidity is 95 or 96, then be very sure that it is not going to condense. But if it is more than 99.5, then you have a doubt that it might condense sometime. So we should play with the top gas temperature to this extent, such that we do not get unnecessarily worried, because there are many operators who like to operate the top gas temperature to 120 to 140. And for maintaining 120 to 140 degrees, which might not be essential because it wouldn't condense, but they increase the fuel input and thereby consume more carbon. And if you consume more carbon, heat transferred to the burden will remain same, whereas the top gas temperature will rise. And for maintaining that top gas temperature to 120 to 140, they are using extra fuel. Extra fuel means extra carbon. And that's the scope which we have to cut down to reduce the CO2. So, to recapitulate what we have discussed today, is that there are only two positive sources of the heat, and that is happening in the Bosch zone. The two positive sources of the heat are the hot blast temperature, which is the sensible heat carried by the blast. The second portion is which is oxidation of the carbon. That carbon may be coming from, let's say, the coke, which is charged at the top, and finally whatever coke is coming in front of the tool, that has got carbon. So that carbon oxidation, that temperature, that is giving heat. So these are the two positive sources of the heat generation. Apart from that, there is a minor amount of heat generation once the oxides, the metallic oxides, once they are getting reduced, and that is happening at different heights of the blast furnace, but they do release 4.5% of the heat. So it's a very small amount of heat, but it does happen. So, but maximum amount of heat is happening from the let's say burning of the carbon to carbon monoxide and the hot blast temperature. We have also seen that if heat is the constraint, then the option that we have is increase the carbon content. Okay, so carbon content means we'll have to increase the coal injection, or let's say the coke. The and we can, if heat is the constant, then increasing the hot blast temperature will, which does not cost a lot, because it is using the blast furnace gas itself to raise the temperature. So whatever technology that we adopt, if we increase the blast temperature, then we are pumping in more heat into the blast furnace, and therefore it is quite likely, if heat is the constant, it is quite likely that we reduce the carbon consumption within the blast furnace. And that may be a very significant step towards the CO2 reduction from the blast furnace. We also saw that, let's say, if we increase the, let's say, oxygen in the blast, let's talk about first the humidity. Increasing the old concept said that we should have higher humidity in the blast, but if you analyze, then you will find that humidity takes away the heat, because the humidity H2O is broken in front of the 2, and where the carbon is reacting with the H2O to produce carbon monoxide and hydrogen. So it does give the reducing gases, but at the cost of heat. So in front of the 2, the heat comes down very significantly, and above in the shaft it gives the reducing gas. So if we have such a situation that reduction is a constant, then increasing the humidity makes sense. However, if that is not the constant, then increasing humidity does not make sense. On the other hand, suppose if we increase the PCI, or the coal injection, then it gives both. It gives more of reducing gas, and which is carbon monoxide, and the hydrogen, because it has got volatile material. And that is why this session, that if you have more of hydrogen, that it gives you, it facilitates you with the better reduction in the shaft. Okay, now apart from that, it also has got carbon, and which does facilitate carbon monoxide generation, which helps in the heat demand. At the same time, it is generating some amount of hydrogen plus CO, so which is better for the reduction property.
I just wanted to know what is the optimum quantity of nut coke that can be used?
You see, nut coke is, in fact, what I did not talk about today, and that is the solution loss carbon. You see, in the reduction process, what is happening at the bottom of the cohesive, or rather near the cohesive zone, we have a temperature which is higher than 1100 degrees Celsius. So at that temperature, there are two things which are happening. One is that FeO is getting reduced to Fe. That is one. And this reduction may happen with the carbon monoxide. And once it is happening with the carbon monoxide, you have a temperature of carbon dioxide, because after reduction, carbon monoxide gets converted into carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide reacts with the coke which is coming down from above. And this carbon plus CO2 again generates CO. And this is the endothermic reaction. Because it is an endothermic reaction, so what happens, that you have carbon monoxide, but the temperature is low. Since the temperature is low, therefore you will find that there are more chances that this gets into the top gas as CO itself. There is very little chance that this will take part in the reduction. But whatever reduction, but at least this will give you, let's say, the extra carbon monoxide. Now, this whole phenomenon of the carbon dissolution, carbon is getting dissolved in form of, let's say, with CO2, it forms CO. This is known as solution loss carbon. And this solution loss carbon is accounting for very significant amount of heat absorption. Okay, so this heat absorption, if we can avoid, then it will be better for, let's say, the carbon consumption. However, this cannot be made zero, or rather, this should not be made zero, because this is dependent upon the factor of the carbon, which is known as Koch reactivity index, CRI. If CRI is high, then the carbon reacting with CO2, or rather reaction rate of the carbon with oxidizing gas, it will be higher. That means if it is too low, in that case the CRI be having too low, the carbon which is coming in front of the tour, that will also not get oxidized. Okay, so there is a margin here, and we should try and keep the CRI near 23 to 24 or maximum 25. If we go below that, then the coke may not react in front of the tour itself. Okay, which then we lose the purpose itself. So it is essential that we have the carbon which is reacting with the coke. At the same time, there is less amount of carbon which is getting oxidized above, and we are losing in terms of the, let's say, it is not causing, let's say, the heat generation. Rather, it is taking away some heat, because C plus CO2 getting into, I mean, generating 2 moles of CO. This is endothermic reaction. So it takes away heat, and it is taking away heat from where? It is taking away heat from the reducing gas, which is going from the bottom to the top. And therefore, the solution loss carbon, if we have something like 40 kg or 50 kg up to 60 kg, that is okay. But if you have solution loss carbon higher than 50, 60 kg, then it is not good, and therefore it will be an impediment in the rate, in the CO2 reduction journey. Okay.
जी सर